Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another live episode of The Breakdown. It's been a minute. Last week was our big FOIP special. We were going to hopefully do another FOIP special, but over 900 pages were redacted. So instead, we're going to file some more FOIPs, and we're going to talk about the Alberta politics tonight, because there has been no shortage of events. I'm going to throw, we had the little card up at the beginning of the show, warning everybody. We're going to be talking about some sensitive topics tonight. Now, here at the show, the belief is just because they're sensitive topics doesn't mean that they don't need to be addressed, because unfortunately, the UCP went and did a thing. We're going to get to that a little bit later. We're going to go through our regular roundup of the week first, but we are going to be doing some sensitive topics. So if you need to tap out at any given point, that's okay, because there's some absolutely horrifying statistics that we need to bring forward, surface, if you will, tonight. But before we get to that, before we get to all of those horrifying fun things, and just for the record, I'll do another little okay, and here we go disclaimer before we jump into the really horrifying stuff. But yeah, there we go. There's my disclaimer, which probably counts for nothing. So let's get right into it. The big news of the week. It's finally here. On May 26th, Danielle Smith finally pulled the trigger on the by-elections. Ran out the clock in many ways. Waited to the last possible minute in many ways, because one of those by-elections is, of course, the by-election that leader of the NDP, Dehed Nenshi, is going to be running in. That's in Edmonton, Strathcona. But she also pulled the trigger on the by-elections in Edmonton, Ellerslie. That was the constituency vacated by NDP MLA Rob Loyola when he decided to go run for the federal party. That didn't work out so great. And then in Olds, Didsbury, Three Hills, where former Speaker of the House Nathan Cooper stepped away. Mr. Cooper went to Washington. So we got these three by-elections. Fortunately, the people in Olds, Didsbury, Three Hills don't have to wait very, very long, but they also did not get a whole lot of say in who their candidate was, because Danielle Smith exercised her power of appointment. According to the UCP the rules for the UCP, their constitution and bylaws and all of that, the premier, the leader of the party, is able to appoint a certain number of candidates. Now, typically, that's reserved for an election, but instead of doing that in Olds, Didsbury, Three Hills, she decided to just do it in a by-election, which is, I guess, a choice. And the candidates for the UCP are, there's a lot going on here. And I got to say, Tara Sawyer for Olds, Didsbury, Three Hills looks not in any way controversial, which is probably why Danielle Smith appointed her. She's got pretty good background. We've got Mraiche Bardwaj, who's got quite an extensive history in Alberta politics. And then we have current UCP press secretary, Darby Crouch. Now, originally, when we started the week, we were going to do a little bit of a thing with a couple of the candidates on the NDP and the UCP side, for reasons that will become apparent as we get through the show. We're not going to do that. But let's just go ahead and say that the person closest to the party apparatchik, which would be Ms. Crouch, she has already fully embraced the UCP's bad faith campaign bit, which is actually really disappointing. It really, really is, because I've not seen. I mean, I would assume that the candidate for Olds, Didsbury, Three Hills is pretty much a foregone conclusion. Although the Republicans, they're running their own candidate there. The Alberta Republicans are running a candidate in a by-election. It's just exhausting to say that. And would love to have gone into the history of Mr. Bardwaj, but we got other things we got to talk about. The UCP did a very, very good job of putting together the little graphic. NDP comms have been a little bit different. They're kind of running siloed campaigns. Obviously, we have Naheed Nenshi, who's running in Edmonton Strathcona. That's been going on for a little bit of time. We also have in Edmonton Ellerslie, Gurtej Singh Brar, and I apologize if I'm saying Gurtej wrong. But Gurtej Singh Brar is going to be running for the NDP in Edmonton Ellerslie, and then in Olds. And I gotta say, of the candidates, this candidate from Old Stitsbury Three Hills for the NDP, Bev Taves, probably Taves, because that's how the other Taves said it. She's got a really, like, I gotta say, Old Stitsbury Three Hills, with you got two very, very solid candidates on both the UCP and the NDP side, which is nice, I guess. Of course, there is also the Alberta Republican Separatist candidate who's running there. And while there hasn't been any polling that's been publicly released yet, the indications are Mr. Cam Davies may pull some numbers out of there. Because there's a lot of people who, like I said, are very unhappy that Danielle Smith went ahead and used her divine power of appointment to appoint a candidate. The UCP Constituency Association was not allowed to have a nomination there, so there's some embitteredness, and it's going to be interesting to see how all of that plays out. The by-election is scheduled for June 23rd, and fortunately, Danielle Smith, which will also turn into a joke later, by the way, Danielle Smith got rid of the electronic tabulators, so we should have the results sometime in August, probably. Moving on from there. And this is a bit of a niche story, but it's one that's really, really important because it kind of speaks to the attitude that is going on in the Alberta legislature right now, particularly with certain members of the United Conservative Party. This is an email that we redacted some information to not identify the speaker that was invited to speak at a not government event. Now, this is where it's going to get a little complicated, but it gets really, really important really, really quickly. The idea behind government, and if you talk to anybody who's been an MLA or been involved in government, is there is supposed to be a very hard line of separation between government resources and party resources. You're not supposed to do any party stuff using government resources because taxpayers pay for government resources, whereas party donors pay for party resources. The other big problem that exists when you start to mix the two is if you're, say, I don't know, a UCP MLA, and you decide to send out an invitation to a highly partisan, polarizing event from your MLA account, that gives the impression of some legitimacy that event hasn't earned. Say what you will about elected officials appearing at some of these deeply problematic events. The reality is that the seats that they occupy are not theirs. The seats that they occupy are their constituents. And to use those seats for partisan gain as opposed to representing their constituents is deeply problematic. Nonetheless, Eric Bouchard from Calgary Lougheed, and yeah, that's the constituency that does all of the injection of truth nonsense. He invited a speaker out to the next in the Injection of Truth series of events that he continues to hold in his constituency. We have the screenshot of the email on the screen, so everybody knows that it's real. The email reads, "Good morning," and then we redacted the name. "My name is Eric Bouchard, and I'm the MLA for Calgary Lougheed. Our constituency association is hosting a town hall on June 25th titled The Courage to Listen, Building a Framework for a Sovereign Alberta within a United Canada." I just had to do the voice there. "In the spirit of open and honest debate, we are inviting speakers from across the spectrum, including the Monarchist Society of Canada and one of the policy writers from the 1995 Quebec separatist referendum. We strongly believe that a true democracy is best served when all perspectives are heard and considered." Our most recent town hall, so again, right out of the gates. It's very, very clear. This is a constituency association town hall. This is not a government-sponsored event. Sending it from an MLA's government email sure does make it look that way to anybody who receives the email. Our most recent town hall was attended by over 550 people in person and viewed by 26,000 live online and has since reached more than 3.5 million views. We are confident this event will also attract significant attention and foster meaningful discussion. I've included my constituency association president. Again, we're stepping outside of the normal spheres that we're supposed to have. Daryl Comic in this message. He can assist with any logistics that you may require, including traveling, accommodation, slide decks, and other arrangements. Thank you for considering this invitation. I hope you'll be able to enjoy this for what promises to be a timely and impactful event. So there's a lot of problems here. First of all of the problems that I've addressed, but it's not very difficult to imagine a situation where somebody who receives this email thinks that those expenses that we just talked about, travel, accommodation, other arrangements, could be paid for by taxpayers' money. Now, in fairness to Mr. Bouchard, after this got put out on social media, he put up a clarification saying that it was a mistake, shouldn't have done it. Well, yeah, true that, but once the cat's out of the bag, the cat's kind of out of the bag. And the fact that the notion of even writing this email using government resources, the MLA, you can see the Legislative Assembly thinger is right there. The fact that it's not like, whoa, I absolutely can't do that is really problematic. And it speaks to the entitled nature of certain UCP MLAs, allegedly. Moving on from there. We got to talk about the Orphan Wells piece, because a new report is saying that the annual levy, the amount that's charged to Alberta oil companies to fund the cleanup of orphan wells. Now, again, this is where the terminology gets to be a little bit fluid or complicated. We have orphan wells, we have abandoned wells, we have reclaimed wells. So the best way to think about it is reclaimed wells, abandoned wells, all of those still belong to somebody. There's some company out there that has ownership of that chunk of land and has the responsibility to clean it up. Orphan wells are wells where the companies have gone bankrupt. The companies no longer exist and nobody is around to clean it up. So that responsibility falls to the Orphan Wells Association, and ultimately it falls to Albertans. In theory, heavy emphasis of in theory, the oil producers are supposed to pay a levy or a tax or a fee or whatever we want to call it, so that they're putting the money up front so that they can clean up the wells. That doesn't work, though. And this new report highlights exactly that. The report was written by Drew Uchuk, formerly a staff lawyer with the University of Calgary's Public Interest Law Clinic. And he says this year's levy rate, combined with low rates in previous years, is leading to an estimated shortfall of $1.2 billion. Now, again, that is a shortfall for the existing inventory, the stock, which is a really weird term to use because we're talking about like mini environmental disasters. The stock of mini environmental disasters is at the moment right now. There's a boatload of other resources that are expected to be orphan as we go through time. The numbers for what the clean up all of these resources, these abandoned things, we're talking like $250 billion in some figures and above. Nobody knows because it's a work in progress, but the estimated funding shortfall to clean up the stuff that's currently in the inventory of the Orphan Well Society is $1.2 billion. And if that isn't made or provided by the oil and gas companies, then the responsibility falls to you and me, the Alberta taxpayer. It is bonkers, absolutely bonkers, that Danielle Smith held a renewables moratorium to stop the development of renewable resources in the province of Alberta, which, as we also saw this week, has had a catastrophic effect on investment for developing renewable resources in Alberta, despite the fact that Alberta is by many considered to be one of the best places to do wind and solar. She shut that whole industry down for 7 months, in order to make sure that if you wanted to build a wind turbine or a solar farm, that you had to put the money up front in order to make sure that the concrete could be cleaned up. And if you compare concrete to leaking gases that ruin farmers' fields, one of them is objectively worse. One of them is objectively less worse. The concrete is less worse. The concrete is less worse. The oil wells, the gas wells, those are much, much worse. So she shut down the renewables industry in order to make sure that renewables had to pay to do their cleanup, but oil and gas continues to not have to pay enough to clean up their own messes. Moving on from there, we got two pieces that we got to talk about with the corrupt care scandal, as the NDP have called it, the alleged corrupt care scandal. So I don't get text messages from my lawyers after this show. There's two significant developments that happened in the alleged corrupt care scandal. The first one has to do with the Auditor General. And there's a bunch of legal maneuvering that has gone on in the past couple of weeks in regards to the lawsuit that was filed by former AHS CEO Athana Mentzelopoulos, where she alleged wrongful dismissal. She's suing the government for $1.7 million. Her statements of claim have contained some very incendiary allegations against some of the behavior that has gone on within the government, within Alberta Health, within Alberta Health Services, that she allegedly tried to blow the whistle on in conjunction with working with the Auditor General. She disclosed some documents to the Auditor General. The province has said, we want to know what was in those documents. They weren't her to disclose, darn it. And so there's been all this legal stuff. The long version and the short version is that the Auditor General got intervener status, which is to say they have a dog in the fight in the lawsuit. Now, it's not so much the outcome, but they have concerns. And this week, Albertans got to see what those concerns were. Basically, what it says is that Doug Wiley, the Auditor General, is opposed to the government's efforts to question Mentzelopoulos regarding specific records and information she provided to his office. It argues, the Auditor General's office and the statement that he filed, that questioning would, in essence, be an indirect way for the government and AHS to get an early heads up on what documents Mentzelopoulos has provided to the Auditor General. So there's a lot to unpack there. There's a lot to unpack there, because in effect, what the Auditor General is saying is, I don't want the government and AHS to know what areas I'm going to be looking into. I don't want them to know the specifics, which has some fascinating implications. Some of those implications have already bubbled up on social media. There's no shortage of people who are saying, oh, why is the Auditor General concerned that the government and AHS might get an early heads up on what he's investigating, unless there's concerns that they might try to do some sort of cover up? That's one of the questions that's been asked by multiple pundits. And it's a fairly legitimate question, because the Auditor General is only saying, I don't want them to know what I'm going to be looking at. I don't want them to know what those records are. I have my own investigation to conduct. I won't tell anybody, I promise, what's in them until I finish my report. So he's making a very clear argument that there's not going to be any violation of any kind of privilege or anything like that. But he is saying, I would really like them to not get an early head start on knowing what's going to be in my report, which again is wild, because the big question has to be why. But the other big news that came in the corrupt care scandal this week had to do with one of Danielle Smith's favorite go-tos in talking about the scandal, the investigations. Deputy Minister of Economy, Jobs, Trade and Immigration, Christopher McPherson, has issued the following update on the independent third-party investigation of procurement and contracting processes used by the Government of Alberta and Alberta Health Services. In March 2025, the Honourable Raymond E. Wyatt, former Chief Judge of the Provincial Court of Manitoba, was appointed to lead an independent investigation into the procurement of pharmaceuticals and the services offered by chartered surgical facilities by the Government of Alberta and AHS. An interim report was to be delivered to the government on May 30th, 2025, with the final report being delivered June 30th, 2025. When the investigation was being initiated, I was instructed by Premier Daniel Smith to ensure that Judge Wyatt had the time and resources necessary to bring his expertise to bear fully on the matters under consideration. Since then, the government and AHS have provided thousands of documents to Judge Wyatt. A significant number of individuals have been identified for interviews by Judge Wyatt. Given the number of documents and interview requests in consultation with the mutual agreement of Judge Wyatt and the Deputy Minister of Service of Alberta and Red Tape Reduction, I have extended the term of the investigation. An interim report will now be delivered by September 24th, 2025. A final report and recommendations will be delivered by October 15th, 2025, and will be posted on alberta.ca. I've conveyed the information to Premier Smith. The ministerial order and the terms of reference for the independent investigation are otherwise unchanged. So, in a nutshell, the very, very quick, very, very thorough investigation that Daniel Smith promised Albertans into the alleged corrupt care scandal had a due date of 2 days ago. On the day that the report was due, they came out and were like, this is awkward. We're actually going to push that back by 4 months. That's cool, right? Nobody really wanted to be distracted by this during the summer or a by-election or 3 by-elections or anything like that. We didn't want that. So we're just being very, very thorough. Now, there are 2 interpretations that have been publicly floated, at least 2, of what's going on here. One of the interpretations is that the judge has identified, there's some things I got to look into here. There's some interviews I got to have here. It's worth remembering that this judge does not have subpoena power. So he can't compel anyone to speak to him because while there's being an investigation that the province of Alberta is paying this judge to do, it's not being conducted under the Inquiries Act. So he can say please and thank you, and he can send a bunch of emails and maybe send an 8 fruit basket or something. I don't know. But he can't compel anyone to talk to him. So one of the interpretations is, wow, with what he's found, gosh, it's so bad. It's so bad. It's so damning. The UCP are going to try to run out the clock and push this thing back as far as they possibly can. And it's not, especially given the lights of the events of the last 72 hours. It's not unreasonable to say, hey, they promised that we would have the interim report by the end of May, and then they pushed it back 4 months. So there's no reason to think that they wouldn't do that again. That's a perfectly reasonable interpretation. One of the other interpretations that's being floated out there is that the UCP, the government that is implicated by the allegations in the alleged corrupt care scandal, are one of their defensive maneuvers was to drop a semi-truck worth of documents onto the investigating judge, who again he's basically a private investigator at this point, very, very qualified private investigator, no disrespect intended, but they basically dropped a boatload of paper on him and said, best of luck sorting through all of this. Good luck finding the needle in the haystack. We've given you 6 haystacks and 1 needle. Nobody knows for sure. And again, that's problematic because this scandal, there are pieces of what's been alleged, as we talked about on our last episode. There are pieces of what's been alleged by the former AHS CEO in her lawsuit that are demonstrable with the FOIP information that has been obtained, not just by us, but by many other people who have been chasing this whole disaster down. So Albertans really do deserve to know, but the moral of the story is they won't for a while. Moving on from there. One of the things that was predicted was when Danielle Smith rolled out her anti-trans, anti-medical freedom, anti-medical choice, anti-parental choice policies on the provision of gender-affirming care, was that there were going to be some lawsuits. And it turns out there have been some lawsuits. There's one that was announced just this week. That's what we're here to talk about next. So the CMA, the Canadian Medical Association, has filed a lawsuit against Bill 26, Danielle Smith's I want to be in every doctor's room legislation. From the CMA's release, doctors are governed by the highest standards of ethics and professionalism. Under Bill 26, they are now powerless to provide independent expertise, clinical guidance, and treatment options when it comes to gender-affirming care. This legislation has put me and many of my colleagues in a state of moral crisis, says Dr. Jake Donaldson, a Calgary-based family physician providing gender-affirming care to about 40 adolescents. The CMA asserts that Bill 26 and its proposed changes violate the freedom of conscience of physicians in Alberta, contrary to Section 2A of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Protecting freedoms of conscience in medical practice ensures doctors can provide medical guidance and treatments in the best interest of their patients without facing disciplinary action. And the language of this little piece is really quite fascinating. And it's fascinating for a bunch of different reasons. One of the reasons is this is the language that Danielle Smith has said that she's going to be using in order to pursue the changes to colleges. She's referred to it as her Dr. Jordan Peterson law. So she's been very, very clear that she believes that physicians should be able to do as they see fit unless it makes me feel icky, in which case then she's going to use the power of the province to bring the boot down on kids who are already disproportionately vulnerable. That's the reality of the situation. It's hypocrisy at the highest level, and it's becoming something of a stock in trade for Danielle Smith, but it's pretty entertaining that the CMA chose to use that kind of language in regards to their announce of their lawsuit. And that brings us to the thing. So I'm going to put the disclaimer in here now. I wish I didn't have to. I wish I didn't have to talk about this because it's so stupid. And it's such an overreach. And it's all just so bad. We're going to get into the book bans. But in order to have a conversation about the UCP's book bans, the Demetrius Nicolaides announced on Monday, there are some things that we're going to have to address. And this conversation is not going to be comfortable. There's no way to have this conversation comfortably. So if you're able to stick through it, I think it's a very important conversation. We wouldn't be having this conversation on the show if it wasn't critically important, if it wasn't being horribly misrepresented, and if we hadn't gotten inundated with messages from folks since the announcement came out. And I feel like before we get into the content part of the segment, I don't really know how to thread this needle. I'm going to be honest. I really, really don't know how to thread this needle. One of the things that I've heard from multiple people is there is a performative piece that seems to be being utilized. There seems to be individuals that are being chosen and elevated specifically because of their sexual orientation. And there's a lot of folks I've heard from in the last 4 or 5 days from the LGBTQ2S plus community who are expressing an incredible amount of frustration, an incredible amount of hurt, because there are people who are part of their community who, instead of speaking about evidence, speaking about lived experience, the term that I have heard used and was asked to use, and I'm really uncomfortable with this because I'm as I've said many times on the show, I am as vanilla on the spectrum as you can possibly be. I am a straight, cisgendered, middle-aged white guy. And so it's really uncomfortable for me to use my voice to speak to issues for communities that I am not a member of. And I want to be really clear, I wouldn't be doing this if I hadn't been asked by so many people to make it clear. The pick-me's are a problem. They really, really are. There are people who are so desperate for attention, who are so desperate for power or worse, proximity to power, that they will turn their backs on their own communities. And it's sad. And it's deeply, deeply hurt a lot of people. And so I wanted to get that out of the way because I'm going to be speaking about a lot of issues here that I can't claim to have a significant personal stake in above and beyond what I believe is morally right or wrong. I'm going to do my best. And if I screw up, I apologize in advance. And I'm going to ask if anybody if I do something really horrible in the next 30 minutes, please feel free to send an email or a DM because I do try to do better. All of that being said, that was awkward as all hell, wasn't it? Let's talk about the book bans. So on Monday, Demetrius Nicolaides took to the lectern to claim that books with graphic images were available for children too young to understand the content or the context. And there's some pieces here that we got to kind of play out because some of the criteria that he used were a little bit vague, a little bit questionable, and certainly a little bit manipulative.
The book contains mature content such as child molestation, sexual activity, and nudity, in addition to other mature content such as alcohol use, drug use.
He's speaking about one of 4 books that the UCP chose to highlight in this exercise. And we're going to talk about those 4. Oh, sorry. I'm just being told that former Minister of Mental Health and Addictions, Dan Williams, wants to weigh in on this conversation before we proceed.
Thank you very much for your service. If you're military members, thank you to everyone who's a Legion member. Cheers to you, Mr. Speaker, to the Canadian Legion. God bless.
We wouldn't want kids to be exposed to negative alcohol use or inappropriate alcohol use, like inside the legislature by a minister of the Crown. That would be something that we definitely wouldn't want kids to do. Good thing, presumably, there were no kids in classes attending the legislature as part of their education that day. Let's hope, at least. So there's some hypocrisy. There's some fear mongering going on. Let's get that addressed right out of the gates. The argument at its high level is there's some things that some kids are too young to understand. And I want to be clear here. I have not seen anybody advocate, and I want to be clear, I'm not advocating for kindergarten kids to be exposed to the kind of content that's in these books. Let's be clear about that. These books do have age ratings. They have been assessed by people trained in what are these books appropriate for? What age is this what age groups are these books appropriate for? Nobody is saying that these books should be put before kindergartners. Nobody's saying that these books should be put before kids who don't have the ability, who don't have the thinking skills to interpret them and understand them. Nobody is making that argument. But the argument that the book should be completely removed from the schools because of their content is a very problematic one. And this came up at the press conference.
What if somebody complains about the Bible, because there are, not graphic depictions, I don't believe, but there are written accounts of things like rape and murder and some things that probably are not topics that are not necessarily appropriate for elementary schools, to your point. So what would happen if somebody raises objections to some of the explicit content that we see in all kinds of books, including the Bible?
An individual has the opportunity to raise any objection that they have with any book found in a school library. They can do that currently. As we go through the next couple of months in engaging on the development of these policies, our intent is to ensure that extreme offenders such as these ones that have been identified do not make their way into a school library. Of course, there are lots of examples of in a variety of different novels and other important works that maybe contain references to violence and other pieces. So that's where I think we need to work on helping to develop the standards. Is it a challenge to have a book that has commentary about violence? Probably not. Is it a problem to have a graphic novel that has graphic depictions of oral sex? Probably. So that's.
So it's not the content. It's not the content that bothers the minister and the people who brought this to his attention, who, yes, we will be getting to shortly. It's the pictures you see. That's what the concern is. And this is where context gets to be so important. So what are the books? There's 4 books that the UCP has decided to highlight as being problematic. There's one called Fun Home, which, oh gosh, that sounds like it. No, it's a family tragic comic. It is a dirge of a book that highlights a lot of tragedies that occurred in this family. It's also worth noting that it's a memoir. It's autobiographical. There's a book called Flamer, which is another semi-autobiographical graphic novel that was done by Mike Curato, who grew up in the environment that he's talking about. So it's a somewhat fictionalized account based on his real life experiences. There's a book called Blankets, which is, again, an autobiographical book. And there's a book called Genderqueer, which is, again, an autobiographical book. Now, these books have been very effectively talked about, denigrated. There's been certain panels that have been presented to the media with little pieces blurred out. And that's probably not a bad thing, that some of these images were blurred out. But there's a couple of things that we got to put back into context. These are not just books about young people learning about their sexuality for titillation and for fun. This isn't what these books are. And we're going to go through each of them, and then we're going to talk about a few things. So we're going to talk about the first one, Genderqueer, which is by Maya Kobaby. I'm sorry if I'm getting that wrong. This book received an Alex Award in 2020, award given by the American Library Association to books written for adults that have special appeal to young adults ages 12 through 18. So the American Library Association determined that this book was content that was appropriate for kids ages 12 through 18. Now, some of the images are based on ancient Greek art. So there's corollaries here. There's depth. It's not just pictures. And it's just a book. The next one we need to talk about is one called Fun Home. This is the one that's going for the ironic title, because the content of the book details abuse by an authority figure that is very much framed as abuse. It is a story of an author growing up in a small town and a coming of age as a lesbian. In 2009, Fun Home was listed as one of the best books of the previous decade by the Times of London, Entertainment Weekly, and Salon.com, and as one of the best comic books of the decade by the Onion's AV Club. In 2010, the Los Angeles Times literary blog jacket copy named Fun Home as one of the 20 classic works of gay literature. In 2019, the graphic novel was ranked 33rd on the Guardian's list of the 10 best 100 books of the 21st century. So again, this isn't just, oh, we do some dirty pictures. That's not what this is. And if you take a look at the plot summary of what Fun Home is, there's a lot. I haven't read it yet, but there's a lot of layers and there's a lot of nuance. And it juxtaposes the difference between the consequences of repressing somebody and somebody being able to explore who they are. The next book the UCP has decided to label as an extreme offender is one called Blankets. It tells the story, and again, another memoir. It tells the story of growing up in a deeply religious family. It talks about sexual abuse by an authority figure towards children, which happened to the author. And it talks about falling in love. There's nothing, and again, haven't read it yet. There's nothing in this book that can be identified as being in any way affiliated with gay, except for the sexual predator that targets children, who's, by the way, very clearly identified as the bad guy. So there's nothing bad there. The last book is one called Flamer. Oh, by the way, Blankets won 8 awards for comics. The last one is Flamer by Mike Curato, and this is the semi-autobiographical one. So this is the one that's based on his experiences. One of the subjects present in Mike Curato's debut graphic novel is the toxic masculinity and homophobia that the main character, Navarro, contends with, which happens during his time at a Catholic school and while at the summer camp. This is also portrayed when Aiden attempts to fit in with his pubescent campmates by acting heterosexually and imitating their homophobic macho behavior. Flamer also deals with struggles of identity, as the main character, who had a Catholic upbringing, does not fully understand his feelings towards other boys, and he has trouble accepting his own queerness, as he was taught that being gay is considered a sin. The bullying suffered by Aiden in school and during the summer camp causes his self-hatred to increase, which eventually leads to a breaking point where he begins to have suicidal thoughts. Again, this is based on a true story. And as we're going to see in a couple of minutes, it's one that is a true story for far too many kids. And it is not because these kids are reading comic books that deal with these issues. It's because this is the world that kids have to grow up in. It's worth noting, Flamer received a Lambda Award, Literary Award in 2021 in the Young Adult category. So let's take a couple pieces out of this before we move on. All of these books are targeted for young adults. There's nothing wrong with that. You take a look at any of the movies that are rated 14A or PG-13. There are potentially elements of all of these things in here. There is nothing to suggest that in front of the right age group, these books are anything other than books. Now, the primary group that's taking credit for all of this is a group called Action for Canada. And it's such a mess. It's such a mess. We're going to do a condensed version of Action for Canada tonight. But as we were getting ready to put forward this episode, it became abundantly clear there's a lot more going on with Action for Canada than we could address without detracting from the conversations that we need to have tonight. So we're going to do a deeper dive on Action for Canada and their claims as to why these books are pure evil. Later on this month. But we're going to talk about them a little bit. So the primary group is that's taking credit is Action for Canada. The Calgary chapter leader, I wish I was making this up, was one of the keynote speakers at the Calgary Lougheed Eric Bouchard event, Let Kids Be Kids. So I wonder how they got their foot in the door. On their website, Action for Canada says their mission is to protect Canada's rich heritage, which is founded on Judeo-Christian biblical principles. So out of the gates, we're talking about a fundamentalist Christian right-wing group that wants Canada to only be a place for fundamentalist Christian right-wing people. There's a little bit of a bias here, especially when you consider that two of the books that I've already talked about already talk about how harmful the influences of dogmatic religion were on their lives as they were trying to navigate growing up being LGBTQ2S+. The founder of the organization have received backlash for promoting anti-LGBTQ, anti-Indigenous, anti-Islam, and anti-choice messages at many events. The group was banned from school board meetings in Mission in BC in 2023 after promoting hateful propaganda at a meeting. Like I said, we're going to be doing a deep dive on them later. But needless to say, and there's video, which we'll be including on the deep dive, where they're bragging about how they got into the door through their MLA, and they got in front of Danielle Smith, and Danielle Smith made sure that their stuff got in front of the education minister. And it's the same old story of we've lost the guardrails, that are supposed to keep bigoted, hateful, fringe views outside of the law are gone. They have been dismantled in fully by Danielle Smith and the UCP. And now, if you're able to speak passionately, it doesn't matter, it seems, what sort of bullshit you want to try to advance. If you're able to speak passionately and catch Danielle Smith at a public event, then your bullshit may very well become provincial policy, if not law. Now, a couple other pieces that we got to address. First of all, it didn't take very, very long at all for the UCP press secretaries and policy advisors to show up and start making all of their claims. And this is part of the problem, because this is a serious, complex, nuanced conversation that can have real harm if not executed well. The last people who should be throwing hyperbolic rhetoric out into the conversation are the people who, A, are members of the LGBTQ2S+ community, and B, people who are government officials or government employees, the ones who are trying to lead the conversation. We have a tweet here from UCP Press Secretary Garrett Kohler. These problematic books were found in and around books like Goldilocks. And then we see Flamer, which, by the way, has no explicit nudity in it. There's mentions of things, much like in the Bible, but there's no graphic sexual acts that are portrayed in Flamer. So let's get our context right from the start. The book on the left, the Flamer book, that has no graphic nudity. There's some implied nudity, for sure, but there's no graphic nudity that is depicted. There are implications, for sure, but as we heard Minister Nicoletti say, as long as it's not graphic and explicitly depicted, then it's fine. Second of all, and I cannot believe I have to say this, but if you look closely at the picture and the Goldilocks book that Flamer is beside, it's not Goldilocks. It's Goldilocks Wanted Dead or Alive, which is a graphic novel. But again, we're going for the bad faith arguments. We're going for what is going to be the most incendiary thing that we can say. What is going to make people the most angry, the most afraid? And if there are kids who get caught in the crossfire, oh well. That's just the cost of doing business. That's just the cost of appeasing our stakeholders. And that's the really gross, horrifying part. One of the other things that's worth keeping in mind about this press secretary's damning tweet with graphics is it also included, it revealed, a couple of close-looking people caught it, it revealed the school that these books were, the picture was taken in. And as much as we have that UCP candidate who's running in Edmonton right now, running around saying, oh, Nenshi, do you believe that kindergarten children should be exposed to books like these? At least one of those pictures is from a school where there are no kindergarten children. There are no grade 1 children. There are no grade 2 children. There are no grade 3 children. That school starts at grade 4. So we're talking about kids that are at least 9 to 10 years old at the lowest end. And there are protections that exist inside of these libraries to make sure that these books aren't checked out by kids that they're not age appropriate for. So out of the gates, the UCP and their little minions have done an exemplary job of misrepresenting the issue, of framing the issue badly, of straight up lying or being profoundly disingenuous, because it's not Goldilocks. It's Goldilocks Wanted Dead or Alive. Two very different books from very different time periods. The main themes of Flamer, the book that's in that picture, beside Goldilocks Wanted Dead or Alive, are toxic masculinity, homophobia, bullying, and suicide as a result of those things. And while those things are alluded to, nothing explicit is shown. But instead of addressing those issues, instead of acknowledging that there is a staggering number of kids who deal with the issues that these books try to talk about, instead of dealing with that, we have these press secretaries and these UCP candidates and these pick-me's running forward with bad representations and emotional but profoundly misleading arguments to try to get people fired up and afraid. So let's talk about some actual facts. According to the Children's Health Policy from the Simon Fraser University in 2024, suicide is the second leading cause of death in this country, behind only unintentional injuries for 15 to 19-year-olds, and it's the third leading cause for 10 to 14-year-olds. I'm going to read that again, because these are the stakes that we're playing with. These are the stakes that these partisan hacks are just messing around with because they don't care, but they're so consumed with advancing their own personal profile and their own personal agenda that they don't give a good goddamn what the costs are. Suicide is the second leading cause of death in this country, behind only unintentional injuries for 15 to 19-year-olds, and the third leading cause for 10 to 14-year-olds. Suicide accounts for 25% of all deaths among 15 to 24-year-olds. And that is the demographic that these books are trying to throw a lifeline to. According to a study done by the Association of Alberta Sexual Assault Services in 2019, 1 in 3, 34% of Albertans experienced sexual abuse while they were under the age of 18. 1 in 3. The same study estimates that 325,000 Albertans under the age of 18 have experienced some type of sexual abuse. According to the Alberta Association of Sexual Assault Services in 2012, of the 14,000 police-reported cases of sexual offenses against children and youth, 88% of sexual offenses were committed by an individual known to that child or youth, with the remaining 12% committed by strangers. Of those known, so of that 88%, 38% were family members, 44% were acquaintances of the child youth, and 6% were intimate partners of the youth. So you had better believe that it is critically important when we're talking about 1 in 3 Alberta youth being sexually assaulted, that they should know what is wrong. They should know when somebody's trying to touch them that way or get them to be touched some way, that that is wrong. Books like these help to educate kids about bad touching. And they help to normalize that if you have been a survivor of that sort of thing, it's not your fault. And this is what the UCP want to take away. And it's predominantly every single one of those books except for one. And the images that they chose to trot forward as being examples of this is very, very bad are all images involving the LGBTQ2S plus community, which are disproportionately affected. Survey results from that same Alberta Association of Sexual Assault Services found that the following demographic groups had higher prevalence rates of sexual abuse compared to the overall rate for Alberta. People who are Indigenous at 66%, people with diverse sexual orientations at 77%. That is the people that these books are trying to throw a lifeline to, and people with disability at 49%. And it's not getting any better. This Alberta Association of Sexual Assault Services paper that I'm referring to here compared their results in 2019 with the best former study that had been done in 1984. And whether we're talking about youth being exposed, youth being threatened, youth being physically assaulted, all of the numbers are up. Some of them by more than double. This is a problem that is not going away, and it's a problem that's not going better. And forcing kids to not have access to resources that teach them the things. And again, I know that there are people who are going to do the, parental choice. It's my choice as a parent what my kids have to or have not to learn about. We teach kids about don't touch the stove. We teach kids about don't play with the lawnmower. But we don't teach kids that, again, 38% of kids who were assaulted, so 38 of that 88%, is by a direct family member. Kids should be taught that if a family member is sexually abusing them, it's not okay and it's not normal. In the same way that we teach kids about not playing with lawnmowers or sticking their fingers in sockets or touching a hot stove. And if you're a parent who doesn't want your kids to learn that if a family member tries to sexually assault you, that's not okay, and there are resources available to help you, I have some questions. And it's an exercise in futility in so many ways. According to an AHS paper in 2023, over half of youth have had some form of sexual initiation by age 14. Again, this is the target demographic for these books. And you'd better believe that straight kids aren't running out and getting their sexual initiation on because they looked at a book that talks about LGBTQ2S plus relationships. It's just not a thing. It's uncomfortable for a lot of people to think that 14-year-old kids are experimenting with their sexuality and their bodies, but it happens. And so the conversation should be, how do we best educate those kids, those youth, those young adults, what's appropriate, what's inappropriate, what is consensual, what's not, what do you do when it's not? And the evidence of education having a positive impact is overwhelming. You don't have to look any farther. And this is where the irony is so dense. You don't have to look any farther than in birth and abortion rates in the province of Alberta. Since 2011, rates of live birth, induced abortion, and estimated pregnancy for ages 13 to 19, since we started having these conversations, have all dropped, some of them by more than half. And you would think that the religious zealots who are leading the charge in ignorance would at least maybe take a victory lap of, if we teach the things about the safe sex, then maybe we won't have the evils of the abortion. You'd think maybe they would at least have a victory lap on that. For the record, abortion isn't evil. It is a woman's choice. Period. End of sentence. But birth rates and abortion rates are down. When we start to talk about how many kids are actually having straight up sex, a quarter of 15 to 17-year-olds have had intercourse by the ages of 15 to 17. So Mr. Nicolaides can stand up there and go like, I don't want the kids learning about the drinking or the other things, at the same time as he's saying, the UCP is saying that kids should be able to run around with firearms without adult supervision, which I swear to God, I'm not making up. It's still going to happen. People are going to people. It's what they do. How do you best prepare them for it? How do you best educate them for it? And most importantly, how do you keep them safe when they fall into the target of a predator? And it's frustrating. I spent my afternoon today wading through all of these statistics. I knew what I was going to find. But it's the reality. And so the question shouldn't be, how do we have these UCP pick-me's who are stepping forward with bad faith arguments, with no regard for the consequences, with no regard to the damage that they're doing, not only to LGBTQ2S plus youth, but to kids who are the victims of sexual predators. It's unfortunate. And it's unfortunate that we have all of these UC pick-me's, whether they're press secretaries or policy analysts or candidates or what have you, that are all trying to make this issue about them. And it's because they're trying to be candidates, or they're trying to be press secretaries, or they're trying to spin. They're not siding with the evidence. And the real tragedy of this whole conversation is that precious few people care. When you talk about who is affected by the anti-trans policies, when you talk about who is affected by these, and let's call them what they are, anti-LGBTQ2S plus book bans, comic book bans, when you talk about all of this, there are precious few people who care. These issues are incredibly low polling. But the UCP base, that is all the way down the chemtrails, WEF, we need to leave the UN. I swear to God, when we go through the deep dive on this organization, it's just, you just feel greasy. This is where they eat. And so this is what Danielle Smith feeds them. And nobody has any regards for who this is actually supposed to be about. And it's supposed to be about what's best for kids. And instead of having an evidence-based, nuanced discussion based on facts, we have UCP press secretaries trying to leave the conversation with misleading lies. And it's even more tragic that some of these individuals who are leading this rhetoric are members of the LGBTQ2S plus community. And again, I recognize I have no stake in that fight from a directly personal level. If we're just speaking about me, if we're not speaking about my friends, if we're not speaking about my family, I have no claim to any of that. But the conversations and the messages that I've been getting from members of the LGBTQ2S plus community who are hurt and they are tired of being betrayed by the pick-me's. People were begging me this week to make sure I said something about it. And I would rather be on the right side of history. And I would always rather stand with the people who are being bullied than the bullies. So if it sounds a little blunt coming from somebody like me, I apologize for that. But it doesn't change the fact that it's true. Moving on from there. We got our last section. And then we'll see if we have any open mic callers tonight, if the Twitter Spaces hasn't crashed yet, which I'm sure it probably has. We're going to talk about, I didn't want to leave it there. I didn't want to leave it on that note. So I wanted to make fun of Danielle Smith for a little while. And that's what we're going to do now, because we're going to talk about your province, your premier performance that happened yesterday. And there is an awful lot to unpack. First of all, I've been listening to Your Province, Your Premier since Jason Kenney. It was a Kenney thing. Jason Kenney started it up when he was still premier. And one of the things that's fascinating is, when it's on the radio, obviously they take their commercial breaks and everything, but the podcast version has never, ever, ever before had ads in it, which is probably good for a long list of reasons. Until this week.
You know your child best, and every child learns differently. If you're looking for an education that aligns with your family's values and your child's aspirations, Alberta's independent schools may be an excellent option. As an integral part of Alberta's education system, they also provide the power of choice, making sure the right environment is created where your child can thrive. From specialized programs to faith-based learning, discover the perfect independent school for you and your family right in your neighborhood.
Oh, did we cut off the website there? Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm not going to do your free advertising for you. I'm not your monkey. But it is profoundly telling that all of a sudden we are seeing these religious, faith-based choice advertisements being thrown up on the Danielle Smith Comedy Hour. And let's get right into it, because Danielle Smith had some ideas about some things. And one of the questions that came up had to do with... I'll leave that for after. It had to do with nurses.
So have you considered changing the way registered nurses are actually trained? In past decades, they were trained in hospital, and it was a 3-year program. Now they've all been required to have a university degree, which is a 4-year program, and it's not necessary to have a full degree to be a nurse caring for people. So I'm wondering, it would reduce training time, training costs. You could get more nurses trained, and if those who want a degree, they could add on that extra year if they want to go into research or something like that.
That's a good idea. I can tell you that we're having a very similar conversation in education. If there's a way for us to have multiple different pathways to get teacher certification, that we're going to be rolling that out in the coming months. But I think that there's probably a parallel conversation to have about nursing and going back to doing some of the things that worked in the past very well for us. So it's a great idea, Denise. And the one thing I would say is there's also a couple of things. We've been very successful at accrediting nurses from across the country. We've gone from 36,000 nurses to 46,000 nurses in the time that we've been in. So I think that's a positive indicator. But we also recognize that nurses have opted to do part-time and casual work in our province more than anywhere else. We only have 39% that are full-time for a variety of different reasons. I think we're hoping to create a better working environment so more nurses want to work more hours, want to work full-time. But in the absence of that, I think Denise is right. We'll just have to be able to train more nurses so that they can, so that we have a constant group of new people coming in to be able to accommodate those who might be retiring or scaling.
So really what we need is nurses who know less, who have less skills. And this is part of the overall culture of Danielle Smith's government, which is anti-expertise. It's anti-expert. we see this over and over and over again, where if there's a group that has spent a great deal of time becoming experts in their area of study, oh, they're bad. We need automatons. We need people who can just do the things. They don't need to understand the things that they're doing. They need to just do the things. And it's really unfortunate because for both of those professions, for teachers and for nurses, it's more than, okay, so we're going to give you this PowerPoint deck and you just go ahead and read off of it. That'd be great. Thanks so much. There's so much more to teaching than performance. And to suggest otherwise is a direct assault on the work that teachers do. Almost as if, I don't know, there's some kind of a teacher's strike coming and Danielle Smith is now weaponizing that in order to try to turn the public against teachers. Can't imagine that's the case. But the same thing with nurses. Nursing is so much more than I will get you your pills or I will wipe the old person's bum. When we talk about some of the areas that nurses practice in, they are in many ways the last defense against a lot of mistakes that get made. Nurses are incredibly important. Their knowledge base is huge. And I don't just say this as a talking head on the YouTube machine. I say this as a healthcare worker. And what I'm about to say speaks only for myself, not any for organizations that I may or may not be affiliated with. But I'm a paramedic and I have nothing but respect for nurses and the practice of nursing, because the knowledge base that they have is so big, and it's so big because it needs to be. When one graduates from nursing school, one does not just then go be a ka-chunk generic nurse. One then goes into a variety of different settings. And of course, you will see nurses who specialize, just like physicians, in certain areas. But nurses are one of the practices where there is an expectation that a nurse can practice in an ICU and then with some minor adjustments can practice in an emergency room and then can practice in oncology. There's a lot of different playgrounds that nurses play in. And because of those varied playgrounds, their knowledge base is huge. And again, to suggest that, if we just did a couple more years, if they just learned to fold the bed sheets, what else do they really need? Betrays a stunning lack of knowledge about what it is that nurses actually do and where they actually do it. But Danielle Smith also had some thoughts on parks.
We've already put legislation in place. I do not want to see one additional acre of territory that's within Alberta turned into a federal park, urban or national or otherwise. If there is critical habitat that Albertans want to protect, we'll do it like we did with Kananaskis. We'll put in provincial parks. We'll do it like...
No, you won't. No, you won't. And we know that because Albertans have overwhelmingly said that they don't want coal mining going on in the eastern slopes. And the UCP has gone out of their way to remove barriers to prevent that from happening. So, I mean, between that and the whole renewables moratorium, I don't know that Danielle Smith gets to in any way portray herself as some sort of champion of the environment. That's just not a thing that she gets to do because she's not. It's really that simple. She's not protecting the eastern slopes from coal mines. She could, according to her reasoning. If it's an issue of protecting land, all she'd have to do is make a couple provincial parks, and then Grassy Mountain wouldn't have to be a thing, and North Back could go pound sand, and the Australian lady could go back to Mar-a-Lago, and they could fight about it there, I guess. But that's not what's happening. So, no. I'm not sure that Danielle Smith gets to hold herself up as the great arbiter of nature. She also got into the separation question a little bit because she was asked, hey, if Alberta separates, are we going to join the States? What's the plan, Danny?
If we separate from Canada, do you have any plan to join U.S. or no?
Well, first of all, I would say that my job is to try to get a better deal with Canada so that the people who are frustrated enough to be expressing that sentiment say that they're not interested in pursuing that. That's what I think my job is. Because I've watched, I was just talking with you, Wayne, off the air on this, that I've watched the separatist sentiment my entire life of watching it. It's come and go. And I think it ends up going down when people feel like we're being respected, like our freedoms are being respected, and that the federal government's not getting in our way.
No, it's not an issue that is new. I can remember attending the election of Gordon Kessler to the WCC in Olds back in 1979.
Exactly. So I would say that the job of any premier is to do our best to make Canada work. And so that's what I am focused on. What I have said is, let's remember, for anyone who thinks that Alberta would be better off in the United States, let's remember that the U.S. under U.S. President Joe Biden canceled Keystone XL and had a very hostile attitude towards developing our heavy oil. So that's what happened under Democrat president in the United States. I don't know what a future presidency might hold, but I don't know that Albertans really want to exchange a hostile Ottawa for a hostile Washington. I think that is probably not going to be a very strong.
I mean, there's so much to play with there. I love the fact that her response to the separatism thing is, it's just this small fringe group. They're not that bad. They've been there always. They just need to calm down. We just need to be treated with respect. But also, would we really want to go with the states? Because, we got screwed on Keystone. Oh, that Joe Biden. He shut down the Keystone. And, they were hostile about the oil development. They were. And so, yeah, Democrats are just the worst. I don't know what a future president might bring. Well, I mean, if Donald Trump manages to stay president for life, I think it's very predictable what a future president might bring, because Donald Trump is the one who started the economic war with Canada and Alberta. So the notion that any U.S. president is going to put Alberta or Canada above the real states, I mean, I feel like there's a certain Puerto Rico that might have some thoughts on that. But that wasn't the only question that she got asked about the separatism piece.
Linda from DeWinton has texted in and said, I'm wondering if the people who feel we should separate consider that there could be a mass exodus out of Alberta by those who disagree with separating.
That may well be. I mean, I guess that's the part of the reason why I've got to focus on trying to make people feel like like Ottawa understands. And the way Ottawa can show us that is very simple. I think that they really need to recognize that we have a different and distinct character in Alberta, and we don't want to do things like they do them in Eastern Canada or like Quebec. Quebec is the same way. Quebec has a distinct way of wanting to be able to enact policy, and that's okay. Those who like the way Quebec does things can move to Quebec. Those who like the way Alberta does things can move to Alberta. We don't need to have the federal government trying to create uniformity in all things across the entire country. They've got to show some respect for the fact that we've got a different resource endowment that we want to develop a different way. We've got different priorities for how we deliver social programs. We've got different ways that we want to protect firearms owners' rights, and all of those things are going to matter in the conversation with Ottawa.
I'm sorry. I've lived in Alberta all of my life, except for a couple of months. And I've lived in rural Alberta, and I have lived in urban Alberta. And the notion that Alberta is a distinct, homogenous culture is unbelievably funny to me. It's just laughable. The differences that exist between the character and the culture of rural Alberta and urban Alberta are wildly different. And it changes from where you go in different municipalities, different cities. There's always different little pieces. The notion that Alberta's resources, the fact that the map was arbitrarily drawn out of the Northwest Territories in 1905 to give Alberta oil is so dumb. It's so dumb. It's so dumb. And it's bonkers that that's the thing. Well, we like our guns And we like our oil, so we're pretty much a distinct culture, just like Quebec, ignoring the fact that Quebec's history is way, 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 way deeper and goes back to the very formation and exploration and discovery of this land that is now called Canada. It's to try to compare the histories of Alberta and Quebec. The only thing that demonstrates is that you don't know boo about history. That's really it. And again, if you take a look at what are the things that Danielle Smith talks about, she talks about her social programs, which are wildly regressive. And as I stated earlier, there is a very small percentage of the population that cares about any of the incredibly regressive things that Danielle Smith is doing on either side of the issue. Most people, it's just not a thing that they're putting any energy into. That's just the reality. And so to try to say that it's our social stance in the UCP in Alberta that defines us as a province, the recent polling is very, very clear. The differences between the NDP and the UCP are 10 to 15%, which means there are a lot of people who very strongly disagree with the social programs that Danielle Smith wants to advance. So it's not a distinct thing, unless her argument is, and it may very well be, that the only real Albertans are the United Conservative Party Albertans. If that's her argument, I mean, she's wrong. Let's be clear about that. But that would at least have some logic to it. But she was also asked about the public inquiry and the corrupt care scandal.
A public inquiry, and there was one before that was done by somebody who was a lawyer, Steve Allen, looking into the funding of environmental groups against our industry. There's lots of ways to do a public inquiry. We hired a judge to get all of the information and to give us a report, and so that is what we're doing. The judge has said that he got thousands of pages of documents, and he needs to interview several people in relation to what he's learned, and he just asked for more time of the deputy minister who's responsible for this. And so we always said if he needed more time or needed more funding, that we'd accommodate that. So I think that that's a demonstration that we're going to make sure that the judge gets whatever they need to be able to give us a good report. I think they're planning now to have the report published online October the 15th. So we'll know in the fall. Under what circumstances would you consider a public inquiry that so many of your critics are calling for? Well, if the judge comes back and says that there's some criminal behavior that took place, that someone within AHS acted in a criminal way to direct contracts to somebody inappropriately, that would probably be an indication. But that is not what's happened. What we're actually hearing so far is that the processes were followed internally. In fact, two of the reports that the former CEO commissioned said that there was no reason for them not to extend the contract to ASG, and that's why it was extended. So I would say that I'm going to keep an open mind. I know that this is part of the reason why we're going through is that there's been a lot of slander, been a lot of defamation, a lot of rumors and gossip and false allegations. And the point is that you have to make sure that somebody is able to look at the full evidence and say, this is true, this is not, and this.
It's going to get awkward. Now I have questions. I have questions how the judge's report needs to be extended. He hasn't reached any conclusions, but Danielle Smith is hearing that nothing criminal occurred. I have questions about how Danielle Smith's threshold for determining whether or not a public inquiry should be held is whether or not a judge says any laws were broken. If there's any, not even law, criminal laws, which is a different threshold than all of the other laws, because we already know that Danielle Smith violated some laws in the past. The ethics commissioner said as much before she was fired. So it's not a question of whether or not there were ethical failings. It's not a question of whether or not there were principal failings. It's a question of, but did anybody get caught breaking the law? And if anybody got caught breaking the law, oh yeah, then we totally have to have a public inquiry, because that'd be really, really bad. But the fact that things have gotten to where they are, that is irrelevant. And I mean, I go back to the Auditor General's story that we talked about earlier, where the Auditor General was like, we don't want AHS and the government getting a heads up, an early heads up on the things that we're looking into. So I find myself curious what sort of things Danielle Smith could be hearing about when the Auditor General is going to court to say, no, I don't want that. I don't want them to get that early head start. That's a little dissonant for me. But I also find it fascinating that the Premier of Alberta took to her bully pulpit to talk about there's been so much defamation. I mean, defamation's a legal term. So I don't know, and I'm open to correction. And I can speak with, I'm going to say, to the best of my knowledge, at least 50% authority on the current defamation proceedings going on in the province of Alberta. But I don't know that anybody has been found guilty of defamation. I don't know how responsible it is, how ethical or principled. I'm not sure if it's criminal. But I don't know how ethical or principled it is for the Premier of Alberta to get up and start pontificating on civic proceedings that have in no way started to unfold in any kind of meaningful manner. But I would just like to say, for the record, as one of the two defamation cases that are going on in the province, as the principal of one of them, I did not lie at any point. Everything that the breakdown shared, I believe to be 100% true. And I certainly believed it to be 100% true at the time. And nothing's been proven false. So, I'm curious what defamation you're speaking of, Danny, because the only two defamation cases that go around this whole circle of things is the one against the breakdown, and the one filed by your former chief of staff, Marshall Smith, against everybody except the breakdown, apparently, which is kind of cool. What's the defamation? What's the proven defamation, Danny? I'd love to know. She just uses words. It's wild. The last clip that we have to play from your province, your premier, though, really does. There's a lot to unpack in it. And it was a caller who was calling in who had concerns about private ambulances.
I was in the Foothills Hospital recently, and a patient there was transported from the hospital to her home in a private ambulance. Now, the private ambulance, it was a minivan, and she was transported on a stretcher. And when they got to the home, they took her out of the ambulance and wheeled her from the ambulance into the house on a furniture dolly. Now, are there standards for these outfits or not? There was blood all over the inside of the ambulance and wasn't very clean. And the woman had low immune ability.
Well, that's thank you for telling me that story. I will certainly raise it with my health minister so they can raise it with Alberta Health Services and Alberta Health. One of the things that we have done is that we are allowing for non-ambulance transfers. That means that it's a vehicle that allows for a stretcher and allows for those who have been trained in handling patients to be able to move somebody from hospital to home, because otherwise, if you're using a full service ambulance, that ambulance isn't available for an emergency. So there's a good reason why we are moving to a different type of model, but we absolutely have to make sure that it's a comfortable environment and that it's a clean environment. So I'm a bit alarmed by what you said. So let me see if I can look into it. And the short answer is yes. We do have a way of regulating that. We've got contractors that have to apply to be allowed to pick up patients. And if
now, there's several different pieces to that we have to parse out because I think it's important. And again, I probably need to throw the disclaimer in that I'm speaking only for myself, not for any organization I'm affiliated with. But all of that being said, There is no doubt. And in fact, there is a lot of research that backs this up. As soon as you add a profit motivation to people who are delivering healthcare, there is a tendency, a pattern, some might say a certainty, that there will be corners that get cut. Because if you're paying the public system $100 to make a widget, and you say, I bet the private system can do it better, we're going to give them the same amount of money and they have to make the same widget. Well, they still have that private company has a responsibility. They have a fiduciary duty to the shareholders and all the people who own the things, and they have a desire to make money. So something's got to give, whether it's the working conditions or the quality of the product, something's got to give. Now, I have some questions about this story, and this is purely speculative, but I have some questions about this story because there is, 100%. There are, Daniel Smith has made a very public of the fact that she's brought in private companies to do certain types of transfers between hospitals and returning people to home. That's a reality. So that's 100% a thing. I'm curious myself as I listen to this, how a ambulance would end up getting blood all over it. That, to me, something has to have gone catastrophically wrong. And so the two options that I find myself left with are maybe it wasn't blood, which is possible, or maybe that's just how bad the delivery of these private services is. There's precious little information to work from here, but the reality is we live in a province where stroke patients were being transferred to hotels that they could not physically get out of under the privatization of Alberta healthcare. So is the story deeply alarming? 100%. Does it probably deserve a little bit more empathy than the premier offered up there? 100%. Because the notion that anyone would believe that that's possible is deeply problematic. Is it possible that this happened as described, unfortunately, in the province of Alberta? The answer to that question is also yes. And that's really, really unfortunate. And it's really, really scary. And it should be the kind of thing that makes the Premier of Alberta stop and go, oh, maybe there's some problems with my very clever plans here. Maybe I'm not quite the loophole finder that I thought I was. Clearly it's not. And what's wild about this is the recent polling that has come out. And I think the thing that is important to understand from my perspective about the recent polling is it's multifaceted. Daniel Smith got some very, very good polling numbers that came out that showed that her honeymoon phase has continued. And there's a lot of people who have looked at that poll and gone, but she's been so terrible. How is that possible? And tried to dismiss that poll. Now, the reality is that poll was done by Janet Brown. And in the land of pollsters, I would love to get Janet Brown to give me some lottery numbers. The DMs are open, not saying, just saying, because her ability to predict things based on her polling with startling accuracy is consistent. Certainly more consistent than any other polling group out there. So you can't really dismiss these polls. One of the things that these polls do show, though, is a hardening of soft numbers. And so the people who are like maybe UCP-ish, instead of drifting away, those numbers have hardened. And what we're seeing with the NDP is a softening of those numbers. And it's going to be absolutely fascinating to see how the NDP manages their communications during the 3 by-elections that are upcoming. Because one of the sentiments that is definitely out in the ether is that nobody really knows what's going on with the NDP. Nobody really knows what they're doing. Their comms haven't been super consistent. They haven't been hammering on a specific message. But there's another very real problem that the NDP need to address. And it's a problem that Danielle Smith is doing a very, very good job of addressing, which is probably why we're seeing the hardening of those numbers for her. And that problem is the world is a very messed up place right now. There's so much going on. We've got the Donald down south running around like a orange orangutan in a very expensive dish shop, with no safeguards in place for him. We've got his cabinet that doesn't seem to understand the basics of the Constitution, the principles of which that they're sworn to uphold. It's a bit of a mess down south right now, and we have to deal with all of that here. We have the continued horrifying conflict in the Middle East that appears to be, in many ways, only escalating. We have the conflict going on with Russia and Ukraine. We have the adversarial relationship that has been manufactured and maintained in no small part by Alberta politicians with the federal government, and the nervousness about what the new Prime Minister of Canada is going to do. We're coming out of a pandemic. We're coming out of economic uncertainty. We're coming out of all of these things. And if history has taught us nothing, one of the things it has taught us is that in times of crisis, people look for a strong figure to say, you know what? I've got this. I am going to fight. Oh, I'm going to fight. I'm going to fight so hard. I'm not going to stop. No matter what, I am in this to win this. I have your back. I'm going to make things normal for you again. I'm going to make it okay for you to be you again. That is what Danielle Smith is doing. I don't know what the NDP are doing. I mean, I have a lot of respect for a lot of people in the NDP. I can only think of one or two of them that I would be legitimately afraid of making angry at me. I can only think of one or two of them that I would be legitimately nervous about. Oh, if I got into a I don't know, an argument, or a disagreement, I don't know about that one. That one, that would go badly for me. And there are NDP MLAs that I would be absolutely terrified of getting into an argument with, because they have strength and conviction, and they can back it up. Jody Stonehouse, I'm talking to you right now. I would be so scared if Jody ever got angry at me. Oh my God, I would be terrified. But the bench strength for I'm going to fight for you is limited. And so far, a lot of the things that the NDP have been talking about are the things that Danielle Smith has been doing a very, very good job of throwing them. It breaks my heart. To me, everybody in Alberta should be livid at the anti-trans legislation that Danielle Smith brought in. Every Albertan should be livid at the fact that the UCP government is trying to ban age-appropriate books for age-appropriate demographics because, oh my gosh, some of them, they say mean things about religion, and they also there's the gay, and I don't like that either. Albertans should be livid about that. That is a violation of so many basic freedoms. But here's the truth. Most Albertans aren't. Most Albertans are worried about the big ticket items. And until the NDP starts to talk about that in a way that says, I'm going to fight for you for these things, that is believable, we're going to have some very real problems in this province. Because right now, Danielle Smith owns the charisma dial in politics in Alberta. With the vast majority of Albertans, not the vast majority, the majority of Albertans, Danielle Smith owns the charisma dial. And the NDP have to figure out how to get their charisma numbers, they're up. They have to figure out how to give Albertans confidence that the they will fight for them and that they can fight for them. And I'm not saying I have the solutions, but that's the reality. The NDP have allowed themselves to be defined as a very, very niche social group. And they got to fix that, because Albertans care about the big ticket items. They care about the cost of groceries. They care about the ability to provide for their families. And that's the reality. I had a fascinating conversation with somebody just a couple of days ago where we were talking about the reality that the NDP need to figure out how to be while they're being, and I'm not being pejorative here. I'm not being flip. I'm not being glib. But while they're being a safe space for all of the people that Danielle Smith are targeting, they also have to find a way to make sure that other demographics feel safe there too. And I had a conversation with an NDPer who was saying, you know what, I don't really care if young men don't like us because they're bigots and we don't want them. And that is a betrayal in many ways of what the aspirations of the NDP are supposed to be about. The NDP are supposed to be a party that says, you know what, we're not going to leave anybody behind, and we're going to do some educating. And it's that educating piece that I really would love to see the NDP start to do. I would really love to see them not just talking to the people that are going to show up for them anyways, but reaching out to the young men that are drifting conservative, because nobody else will talk to them. And this goes back to the pieces of, if you don't do anything to address toxic masculinity, it will self-perpetuate. And so are you going to lead, or are you just going to pose for selfies? These are some of the big questions that the province of Alberta is going to have to grapple with over certainly the next 3.5 weeks, but also over the coming months, because one of the big rumors is we might be facing an early election. Who knows? It's Alberta, and everything is horribly unpredictable, and I wear this shirt for a reason when I do. So it's very, very hard to predict. That being said, and our Twitter space has crashed. God bless you, Elon. I swear to God, we're going to come up with a new way to do the call-in stuff, because this is ridiculous. This is the second or third time now that I have deliberately left room at the end of the show to have a call-in, and the thing has failed. So something that's accessible. Throw it in the comments if you have some ideas, or send us a DM, or send us an Instagram. If there's something that would make calling into this show easier, I'm going to crowdsource the idea on this. We've had the suggestion of Discord. I love it, but I don't love it, because it's got to be like a computer person to know what Discord is. I want to find something really easy. I don't know what that is yet. So if you have an idea for how we can do call-ins on this show without having a complete crash because Elon's high on ketamine, maybe, I don't know, would love to hear from you. So send us a DM. And I guess that's going to be it for tonight, because we can't do the call-ins. Damn it. Okay, so here's the plugs. This is where we do all of the plugging things. I want to say thank you to everybody for listening to the show, watching the show. And we have FOIPs coming. Oh, we have some FOIPs coming, and we have some FOIPs that have been we're submitting to the privacy commissioner, because there's some questionable shenanigans that may or may not have been up, and we're not going to be stopping with any of our FOIP fun. To be clear, the base price for a FOIP, it's not bad. It's $25. It's not that much. But when you start to get into making them look for things, those numbers can go up fairly quickly. So it is by no small part thanks to our Patreon supporters that we're able to do those FOIPs. We're able to get the equipment. We're able to think about what is going to be a better way to do call-ins on the show. And that's because of our Patreon supporters. If you appreciate the kind of content that we're trying to produce here at The Breakdown, we would love nothing more if you can afford to. Sign up to be one of our Patreon supporters at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab. You can set your own little rate for how much you want to support. And we're going to be having some some things in there. I'm going to plug that in just a second. That are just exclusive to our patrons, especially with the summer coming up. We're going to be dialing back a little bit on the live shows just for the summer, because we have some specials that we want to produce. We went down to the Crow's Nest Pass. We have some video and some other pieces of that whole story that we want to talk about, and that's going to take a little bit of time to put together. So we're going to be taking some time to make sure that we're able to do that conversation the justice that it deserves. We have a bunch of our FOIPs coming up that we're going to be talking about as well. And all of the stuffs get put up to those not live shows go to our Patreon sponsors first. So there's it's not a lot, but it's a little something. I will say this though, for our Patreon supporters. We've got a treat. We've got a treat coming. I am so excited. I've had this idea for a Canada Day show for a while. And there were little pieces that I needed that were not yet in place. So I wasn't able to make it happen. But I've had this aspirational goal for doing something for a Canada Day show. And we have executed on that. I know it's a month away. I know it's June 1st today, but the Canada Day special that we're going to be dropping for everybody just before Canada Day, I am so grateful and excited for it. I can't even begin to tell you. It's just so good. That's going to be going up in 2 weeks for our Patreon supporters, as an exclusive for our Patreon supporters. And it's so awesome and good. And I'm very happy about it. So there's my Patreon plug. That being said, if you're not looking for a long-term commitment, you're looking more for the short-term thing, you can also send an e-transfer to info@thebreakdownab.ca. And that helps to keep the lights on and do all the things as well. And finally, the last thing that I'll plug is our ongoing litigation continues. And if you want to help us fight back against that defamation suit, which hasn't been settled yet, Danny, nobody said any defamation has been found to have happened. Danny, cool your jets. You can help us at savethebreakdownab.ca. That's it for tonight. I apologize. I know there were some people who were looking forward to doing the speaking thing. I was looking forward to having them. I don't know what the friggin' problem is with the Twitter thing. So my apologies to everybody there. If you're listening to the audio version of the podcast, love it if you leave a review and the stars thinger. And if you're watching us on the YouTubes, like, subscribe. And this is the new ask, because one of the things that I find fascinating is there's a lot of folks that are saying, why doesn't the breakdown get more views? I mean, probably because I don't pursue it that aggressively. But you need to share the stuffs. So if you're listening to the show, if you'd like something that we said, if you thought that we handled something well, please let us know. And do a little share on it doesn't matter if it's on the YouTube or the Twitter, maybe not the Twitter. I'm angry at the Twitter tonight. But Facebook, wherever it is, share it. If somebody likes listening to podcasts, be like, hey, I got this podcast. This guy rambles a lot, but sometimes he's entertaining and he has some good points occasionally. Got a lot of people helping him do that, but you just give it a listen. Any of those things that help us get in front of more eyes and into more ears, always helpful. I want to say a huge thank you to the chat tonight. I've been trying to pop in and out of it. And so, yeah. I love the little community that we have. I love that, we start the show and there's 5 people, 10 people who pop up right away being like, hey, everybody, it's a positive little place. And I really, really value that. So thank you, everybody who's in the chat. Thank you, everybody who has joined in tonight. And I think that's what I've got. So before we go, there's one other formality I need to make sure that I do.
How's your BS detector evolved over time?
I tend to be pretty trusting.
It just never gets old. It just never does. I don't know why. I'm sure you're all tired of hearing me say that. But it never gets old. And I want to, before I go, one other thing. If unless you're a UCP press secretary. Well, no, even if you're a UCP press secretary, I'd be open to hearing how you're wrong. But tonight's show was hard. It was a challenge, and it's a difficult needle to thread. I don't know if I threaded it. I'd love to hear from you if you thought I did. I'd love to hear from you if you thought there were other points that we should have included. So send us a DM if you're of the DMing sort, and if you're not of the DMing sort, then 100% you can send us an email to that same email address that we had up on the screen a minute ago. He said. Yeah, it's the same one as RE transfer. So you can send if I am open to hearing feedback. So send an email to info@thebreakdownab.ca if I offended you. And that's it for tonight. Thank you all for hanging out and turning in. We will get this call-in thing sorted out come hell or high water. And that's what I got. So thank you all. We'll see you. Maybe not next week. We'll see. We got to play it by ear. We'll play it by ear. We'll see soon in some capacity or another. I just really want to get this Grassy Mountain thing done. So keep your eyes out, especially if you're a Patreon supporter. We're going to do like a special little Patreon get together. And we are going to try to organize something of a summer live event thing later on in the summer with locations in for sure Calgary and Edmonton. I'm also toying with the idea, if there's anybody in rural Alberta who wants to give a hand organizing it, maybe we come out to the southern Alberta, maybe the Clares Home, the Nanton, maybe the Fort Macleod. I don't know. We'll see what we see. If that's something that you dig, let us know. Tough show tonight, I know. Thank you for everybody who weathered it, and we'll see you when we see you. And in the meantime, and in between time, as always, take care of each other and keep the conversation going.